Hi, my name is Awesome Aguilera, and welcome to WEYT, the show where I find interesting people just like you and discover what's going on between their ears. Now, let's get to know one another. What's going on, everyone? This is Awesome Aguilera, and welcome to another episode of WEYT. For today's mantra, we have, you won't always be motivated, which is why you must practice discipline. Get out there, even if you don't want to do it, and do what you know you need to do anyways. Today, as you can see, I've got Devon Dunn LMHC. She's going to tell us what all that means, and I'll tell you how I met Devon. I met Devon through a friend of ours named Tommy, and they went to school together in South Florida. Ever since I met her, I've always thought she's had amazing energy. We have great discussions, and now we're going to share some of our discussions with you. So, Devon,
yes,
tell the people all about how awesome you are.
Okay. Well, yeah, Devon Dunn. I am a licensed mental health therapist, which I just got licensed back in March, took the test in January. I am in the dissertation part of my doctorate for marriage and family therapy, which has been interesting going through that while there's a pandemic happening. And I'm working currently too, doing marriage therapy and individual counseling in March as well, right before COVID hit, which I'm grateful for. I was able to do that. I've been in South Florida since 2013 when I came down for my master's, and I've loved it ever since. I met my family down here, so to speak, my friend family, which Tommy's a part of. And so are you. And then it kind of just went from there. And I got introduced to the South Florida life of going to concerts and festivals and playing Frisbee on the beach.
So where were you before that?
I was in DeLand, Florida in undergrad at Stetson University. Coming down to South Florida was kind of eye-opening for me because I've never really been down here. I went for my master's in mental health. That's what kind of brought me down here. I didn't know anybody. And then I just kind of, my second night staying in Fort Lauderdale, I went out to a concert and saw the Heavy Pets and met Disco Crew, as I call them. Went from there. So I kind of put myself in a uncomfortable of going out by myself, which I've never really done. I'm glad I really did.
What do you think was the catalyst towards making you want to become a therapist at all?
Probably for me, yes, I like talking with people and helping them, but I also wanted to understand my own family better, where I came from, why people are the way they are. Psychology in general, just it continues to. It's always changing. There's always new stuff happening to it and always new information. I don't think anything's ever like for sure with psychology. And that just kind of took me on my journey. I minored in religious studies because I was interested in other cultures and the way people, live their life and how they manage it, which is what culture is really. And so that's kind of what inspired me to go through that. Was I always say a curious person. It just led me to be very, and I lived in a small country town, so I didn't get exposed to a lot. So when I went to undergrad, it's like, well, this is my chance. So I just started taking philosophy and psychology and other religious studies courses to see how other people understood the world, kind of what made me. And then from there, understand myself better and how I want to understand the world.
Now, how would you explain the distinctions between something like religion and therapy?
That's interesting.
Because historically religions were the therapists, they were the ones.
There is a book on that too. I forget, it's an Irish book, and they kind of wrote about how in back cultures years ago, thousands of years ago, there was always not always, I can't say always, but at least within some cultures, there was a designated person that you would go to and talk to who wouldn't judge you, who wouldn't tell you what to do or how to live your life, and just sit with you. So I feel like there's been a need, whether it's a religious person like a priest or someone, but I think there's always been a need for someone to just absorb other people's frustrations and anxiety so they feel better and can function better. I forget what that book's called, but it's an Irish book about that. In religion, if people gravitate to religion or whatever makes them feel better and the world around them. I can't judge them for that. And I think sometimes therapy can be a spiritual experience for people when they go. It just depends on the person. I think within religion can be definitely therapeutic. It just depends on the person, and it depends on the religion as well.
To kind of echo off what you're saying, over here, I have a pillow. I'm going to bring up this pillow. And this pillow says Gypsy Fortune Teller. And you know, my wife, Maritza, she likes to fancy herself like, you know, she likes that bohemian type of fortune teller, you know, essence. I tell her all the time, I'm like, all fortune tellers were the therapists of the medieval times. Right? It's the person you went to that was going to listen to you, absorb all your energy, and tell you, okay, now that you got all that out, what are you going to kind of do about it? And these are what these cards say you should do about it, but what are you going to do about it?
Well, yeah. And I think for me, when it comes to the challenge, or at least what kind of my doctor program has been about, is when people do come to me for therapy, I just sit with the anxiety instead of telling the person what to do, which would be our natural instinct. Is when people come to us with a problem, we're like, well, this is how you fix it. Instead of doing that, I sit with them and let them try to figure it out themselves. I will ask them questions to make them more thoughtful and think about things differently, but I really try to refrain from, here's what you need to do, because they can go anywhere for that. They can go to their parents, they can go to friends or whoever, and someone's going to give them some advice. So I try
Everybody's always trying to tell people what to do.
Yeah, you can around, there's always should be's. This is what you got to do. Here's your should be. You know, the world's full of them.
So why do you think that approach is a more functional approach?
It's a different approach, and the people that gravitate towards it will stay in therapy. The ones that pull for you to do something will go somewhere else. If they want a quick fix, if they want something different, which is no judgment, therapy can be whatever it is. This is just my way of doing things because I enjoyed it and it challenges me as well. And if clients can sit through it, then it oftentimes leads them to find their own insight and find their decisions rather than depending on me to make decisions for them.
And would you say that is basically the foundations of what people would consider CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy?
It can be the foundation of any therapy, whether it's CBT, psychodynamic. I personally do natural family systems therapy, but it can be the foundation of any therapy. So it just depends. It doesn't really have to be any certain kind of model. It depends on the core of the therapist themselves and how they see therapy as being, and then any kind of therapy can manifest itself, I think.
So tell us a little bit more of this natural family type of therapy.
It's a complex one. I've been studying it now almost 5 years now. Well, yeah, I'd say 5 years. And it's based in evolution and science, and it's a systemic theory that wants to understand the functioning of people based on their system, evolution, and generation. So it looks at, it's generational theory. So it looks at how you were shaped over the generations and what is your function based on everyone else in your system. So we all function in certain ways based on, it's interrelational, right? So, or interpersonal. I'm born into a system without choosing it, and I start functioning in a way because everyone else is already, so I serve a function. So that's kind of a glimpse into it, and it gets into certain patterns that are manifested in order for people to survive, and get through things. It gets into, but it's systemic. So that's a key thing. It's a systemic, and it's based on relational. So instead of placing blame, you look at how everyone participates and creates a system where certain things are likely, whether it's certain kind of pairings or certain birth, birth looks at birth order too, and certain things that are passed down.
Thank you for sharing how you've gotten to this point and some of these little seeds that we can all look into. But now we're going to ask you the question of the show, and that is, what's engaging your thoughts?
Engaging my thoughts lately has how contagious anxiety is.
How contagious anxiety is.
Yeah. Something my professor will say, and you can see in a system how contagious anxiety is. And I've kind of been looking kind of at society and how society is kind of manifesting that currently. in different areas. People reacting to COVID and uncertainty, and just how when, when anxiety builds up enough, you get people, being reactive, you get symptoms are much more likely, and it's just, you kind of seeing that manifested. People are contained indoors long periods of time, either isolated or around their family, and they might not want to be. That those kind of things. I think that's kind of been what's on my mind, is what's going on with society currently, and how the pandemic is increasing anxiety, how people react to it.
So let's break down the concept of anxiety, because there's a quote that I default to when I think of anxiety, and that is, anxiety is a preoccupation with things you can't control that are coming in the future.
Two things. Anxiety, with Bowen theory, he uses anxiety as natural energy. So it's something we're born with and we're born into.
Yes.
It's something that you see in nature as well, that leads to reproduction, that leads to survival, things like that. And it can be increased like it is now. And that's kind of where you see, and it's not neither good or bad, it just is. Anxiety just is. But when you see it manifested, you can see it manifested through symptoms or certain kind of relationship patterns, people's functioning in general. But that's kind of how he sees. And then part of that, I guess, anxiety too, is control. I don't think people don't like when they hear this, but I don't think we're as autonomous as we think we are. And I think that goes along with my theory of generational stuff. Like, we have stuff influencing us that we're not aware of.
Yes.
So I think that makes us not have much as control as we want to have. And usually when anxiety is low, we can feel more control, right, in day to day. But throw in a pandemic and our survival's threatened, our control's threatened, and anxiety increases. So, but I think anxiety, according to this theory, is a natural, not something to get rid of, but something to learn how to manage.
Well, anxiety, would you say, is kind of like an emotion, right? And it's there for a reason. It's there because it's protected us in the past. And yes, as you were saying with the evolutionary theory of what you're learning, it wouldn't have gotten passed down from generation to generation unless it was useful for something.
No, and I think it can be useful. I think that's what leads us to pick partners and to make goals happen and to things like that. Now, when anxiety gets on top of us, that's when you can see it manifested as depression or panic attacks. Again, that doesn't make anxiety bad. It's just showing kind of the natural process, what happens when anxiety builds up.
Yeah, of the spectrum of anxiety, of what happens when you have it in control as opposed to when it takes control.
Yeah. And so I think for me at least, becoming more aware of that makes me have more of a choice. It can, at least. So,
well, bringing awareness to things, you would say.
Yeah, that's kind of, again, that's what led me into going into psychology and marriage and family, was to gain awareness.
And what would you say are some of the distinctions of something like acute anxiety versus chronic anxiety?
So chronic anxiety, I attribute to generational. So generational, it doesn't go away. It's there forever. Acute anxiety is what comes up when we're faced with a removable threat. So for instance, I'm driving in my car and someone almost hits me. I'm able to veer out. My anxiety goes up, I react, and then it goes down and I'm good. Chronic anxiety is something that's passed down generational and it doesn't go away. We just have to learn how to manage it. That's how I look at it. So it's chronic and acute.
Do you think it's because of what you're studying now that is making you really focus on anxiety, or where do you think the seeds of wanting to focus on the anxiety are coming from for you?
Probably through the theory itself and trying to understand my own anxiety better. But I try not to focus too hard on it. But it's just one of the core concepts of the theory that I've been studying. And he looks at anxiety, again, he looks at anxiety very differently than, say...
And who was it again? What was the name of the person?
Murray Bowen.
And tell us a little bit more about Murray Bowen so that we can have good context.
His theory is natural family systems, or also termed Bowen theory, but he came to the world of psychiatry and medicine and felt that it didn't give a full explanation for symptoms that were arising. He wanted a systemic theory that was also based in science and evolution. So that's where he kind of built. And his first studies were studying schizophrenic people and their families at an institute. And he studied them for a long time and their interactions with their mom and their dad and even their siblings. And that's when he started to understand that it wasn't just something within the person, but that the symptoms were reflective of their interactions with their parents. And that's when he started inviting generations of people to come in so he could understand how the whole system functioned.
Do you know what some of his resources or mentors were?
I wish I
Like,
knew.
do you know, was he like a Jungian guy, Freud guy? Like, what were some of
He
his,
was Freudian.
what was some of his ideological family tree?
He came from psychodynamic as well, but again, he felt like psychodynamic was too prescriptive, or not prescriptive, but diagnostic. Wanted, again, something that was more systemic, that didn't blame the parents for what was going on, like more relational. His predecessor, who he studied with, is Michael Kerr, who just came up with the book Bowen Theory Secrets. And this came out in 2019. And that one, in the beginning, relates to, he has a story about how trees will send signals to each other when a tree is under threat. So, and it will send signals to other trees telling them not to grow in that area. And for him, that's evidence that, hey, I mean, obviously we don't come from directly trees, but trees are systemic. So
yeah,
animals are systemic.
The universe is systemic.
How would we not be ourselves systemic? So that's kind of, the book is great, but that he kind of goes through that, and it's divided into like 3 sections. And the end of the book, he does case examples of people that are well known. So very interesting.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. So tell us more about what else has been in your mind when it comes to, like, how do you think this pandemic is going to affect something like your career?
I think we're going to see a lot in the next upcoming years. A lot of probably family therapy, a lot of stuff related to like marriages too. In the more intense area, we'll probably see abuse cases come out. Definitely, and then survivors of the COVID, people that are working in hospitals, having to see people die, need therapy.
PTSD
For sure coming out. So I think that in general, and then people just individually having to face certain things that they probably were avoiding. I and others will be busy, being very anxious in coming to the office.
Early on, because this pandemic is still early on, we don't even know how much this is going to reverberate, but do you see your profession as a whole starting to try to coalesce around some of these ideas of how are we going to help others as this continues to expand into what it will eventually actually be?
Yeah, I think so. My field will definitely be trying to figure out how to help people the best and what that looks like. I think you're going to see them coalesce around that.
What do you think, like, the top 3 ideas that the profession can do to try to help? Like, how are we going to help people get through this unprecedented anxiety?
I think it's going to center around trying to help people face the uncertainty and unknown. I think it's going to be challenging for a therapist to themselves have to sit with that kind of intensity. Top of that, most therapists are going to be doing telemedicine for a while, and that brings its own challenges to it.
So let's break that part down a little. What are some of the pros and cons to the telemedicine?
A pro is that you're able to reach clients that normally probably wouldn't make it to your office because they can't get there. And I think even after pandemic's kind of subsided in a few years, you'll see people do a mixture of in the office and telemedicine. So I think that the hard part of telemedicine is not having a separation of home and work, having bad connection, like with internet and wherever your client is.
Yeah.
And then you don't get as much as you think you probably would, but you don't get the energy that if you're in person. So nonverbals aren't as clear, just an energy that you get when you're in person. And I'm interactive with my clients in a sense as I always do a family tree. and I show them patterns in certain things, and that's really hard to do through telemedicine. So those are the challenges for me, at least.
What do you think this time has been doing for your relationships, be them your relationship with yourself, with your family, with your loved ones, with your romantic relationships, friendships? What has this time been doing for your relationships?
Like currently I'm in my own therapy, and I have been going through therapy for a few years, but I'm having to challenge my own negative beliefs about myself that are being intensified by the pandemic.
And you think that these things that you're focusing on are things that have come down through you, through your genetic line. How do you become the catalyst towards evolving that to something better, so that when you pass on your genetic information, there's a much better foundation?
I mean, that's kind of my goal right now in general, how to have a better relationship with myself and understand my core self better. And then I think that is always challenged when I'm in relationship to whoever. So either my boyfriend, especially my parents, my friends, I'm always challenged of how to be my own self, but then also be in relationship to other people without losing that sense of self.
Yeah.
And if I'm triggered, or if what someone says, that's always an opportunity for me to work on that. And so there's specifics within that, but that's kind of a general statement. And then that, I mean, if I have kids, I mean, that's just going to be a whole nother ball game of how to have a different relationship with them, but also be connected with them, but also encourage them to be their own person and kind of.
Well, I have kids. They're going to end up being their own person no matter what.
Well,
At least in my experience.
Yes, but I think that can be co-opted if parents get anxious about their kids making choices that they're not comfortable with, or if they're triangulated into their parents' marriage.
Yeah, and end up with enmeshment and all this fun stuff.
So I think that, that's a whole nother thing.
Well, we can get into this thing. We can get into as much into it as you want.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, that's currently, I'm still trying to get through my doctor and stuff, so kids aren't on the horizon for me yet. But if they do become, even with parents that are prepared to have kids, it's just a whole new challenge.
Yeah.
Of working through that symbiosis that you have at first with your kid, and then them starting to grow away, and the milestone and all of that they're going through, I think is very challenging.
So I want to circle back on a word that you used just a few minutes ago, and that's the word triggered.
Yeah.
That word is being thrown around a lot lately, like, oh, they triggered me, and they triggered this, and they triggered that. With this pandemic, it seems clear to me, at least, that the universe, the environment, nature, whatever you want to call it, wants us to be triggered and learn how to deal with that trigger and evolve past it. Do you feel that at times people use that word triggered so that they don't have to actually deal with whatever it is that's triggering them? It's like, oh, you're triggering me, so get away, or basically I don't want to deal with you. Where really what we should be doing is walking towards that triggering.
I think you're onto something. I think there's that word and probably a few other words that are being overused, but I think that can be used in order to get emotional distance from somebody. I think it is a challenge, at least for me, whenever someone triggers me, it's a challenge for me to how do I mean, it's okay for me to take it personally, but how do I not let that affect the relationship, or how do I work through that? For me, it's constantly working on not taking it personally to the point that I'm reactive to somebody. If something makes me uncomfortable, I need to sit with it. That's kind of what especially therapy has always been a challenge for that too. I can't, if I'm in therapy with a client and they say something that makes me uncomfortable, I can't be like, excuse me, I got to walk out of the room. No, I have to continue to do therapy. Yeah. So I have, that's the word differentiation for me. It's part of Bowen's theory, is growth. Is how do I sit with uncomfortability and not react and learn from it? Yeah. So I can be a better person. So, and then everyone's different with that. But if we're constantly trying to push people away that make us uncomfortable, then we're going to I don't think we grow.
You end up in the world that we are in with people in their echo chambers.
Yeah, right? All they want to hear is their own voice.
And then how is that working for us so far?
Well, and I think it's interesting too. I think that's part of my curiosity as a person, is I try not to just gravitate towards things that make me comfortable or gravitate towards things that I already believe in. But on top of that, like, how do I gravitate towards things that make me uncomfortable and that I disagree with?
Yeah.
So I can have a conversation and maybe my assumptions or biases are wrong. So I think that that's important for people as well. Now, the pandemic has intensified that to the point where people are, obviously can't, or having a really hard time. But I think it is a challenge that we're going to have to face going forward, is how do we sit with the uncomfortability and even gravitate towards people that have different views than us.
I love different views. And sometimes they do make me uncomfortable, but this universe is not meant to be of the same view. It's meant to be, one view is supposed to be there and another view is supposed to be there. And then those views are supposed to collide together to create some new view. It's kind of like having a baby, right? You come together with a partner and you create a new thing that's part of what the other thing had in it as well.
I think you're right too. And I think that probably 2020 is what it's teaching us, or what the universe is trying to teach us, if we can allow it to, is how to see ourselves in other people.
I have this concept that everything is kind of biological. Everything has a life of its own, even ideas. We've been talking about religion, we've been talking about therapy, we're talking about all these things, but all these ideas came from ideas that came before them.
Yeah.
So like a quote that I say often is, every mythology comes from the mythology before it. Mm-hmm. What, in your opinion, makes, an idea become something alive like us, like an idea like religion, like Christianity or Islam? Those are very popular ideas that have been able to penetrate cultures for many, many, many centuries now. Mm-hmm. So what about those type of ideologies continue that idea spreading?
Cultures are, so we've been talking about evolution and survival, and I think ideas, kind of like cultures as well too, are a mechanism of survival. So the ideas that latch on are the ones that people gravitate towards because their survival depends on it. Once a belief or an idea is emotionally attached to somebody, you put in like a group of people that are emotionally attached to it, it's like a living thing.
Its own life force, yeah.
Its own life force. And it's that kind of, and it depends on people's survival. Like you see that happen all the time with religions too, or even whatever it is, politics too. You see if one person speaks against that religion, they're an outsider. They're outcast because they threaten the survival of the group and the idea itself. We're all looking for that sense of connection. Comes down to that, which connection is also dependent on our survival, being social, all of that. So I think that that's part of why certain ideas take off, is because that they kind of form that survival within people, that survival dependency in that sense. And then their identity is fused with it, and anything that goes against it threatens it.
We are fascinating creatures of nuance and subtlety.
And that's something that goes, when something is dependent on your survival, then it's hard to change. I think it takes work for people to, again, like we were talking about, entertain ideas that are different than theirs, and to be able to be thoughtful and to be curious, and it sounds easy to do, but again, when people's survival are dependent on their identity, which has been on their beliefs, then it can be not so easy. They'll do whatever, you can see that, they'll do whatever they can to make their belief survive, which is often goes into that, confirmation bias. So you search for that, and you see people do it all the time, and they'll, even from the outside, you're like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, you're grasping at straws. For them,
it's normal.
Yeah.
We have tons of work to do, but that's what makes living so fascinating. So
it's so fascinating.
For sure. It's just a Netflix series that never ends. So now I want to transition into some of the other questions we have for the episode, and that is, who would you like to speak to, dead or alive?
I would like to speak to my grandparents first and foremost, because they died when I was younger. My grandfather and my mom's side I never met because he had early onset Alzheimer's. Okay. I would like to sit down and talk with him. My grandma, his wife died when I was in 8th grade. So I feel like, and then my other two grandparents died when I was going into college. So I feel like I just wish I could have talked more, especially now that I'm doing family history.
Exactly.
Like I wish I could have done sit downs and had more conversations with them about stuff and just wasn't able to. So now which is interesting, going to other people who I probably normally wouldn't talk to talk about family history. But those are 4 people that I really would wish I could go and talk to and have more conversations with and visit more and things like that, just to understand them better, understand my family history better.
Are you speaking with your parents at all, like the way you would ask questions to your grandparents?
Yeah, well, my dad, slowly but surely it's happening more often with him. He's a pretty private person, and his family was too. So it's another reason why I wish I could talk to them now. My mom, for sure, she did a lot of family history research with my grandma. So she knows a lot, and she's a big storyteller. I'll go and ask her questions. And even still currently, I will ask her more questions about stuff, and my dad, which has been helpful in a lot of ways, just understanding relationships. Or I'll have an assumption about something that it was a certain way, and then I found out new information and it changes everything. So it's been good in that sense.
What are 3 of the resources that you have recommended to other people over and over, or that you feel have hit you in a place that matters?
Well, two books right now. They've been going into my dissertation quite a bit. Let's see.
Oh, yes.
Reading in Captivity by Esther Perel. I've read
over her.
Yeah, she's awesome. She actually, if you go into her resources or references, she was inspired by this guy who I read in undergrad, and I've been reading his clinical book, but this is his book for everyday people, which is Passionate Marriage by David Snarch. She's actually has his, and he has one that's clinical that I haven't even read all the way through. That's called, where is it? It's called The Sexual Crucible.
Okay.
So he talks about, and both of them have been inspirational to me because both of them are influenced by Bowen. Been reading them, and they talk about, she calls it the emotional blueprint that you carry with you into your relationship, and he does family history, and they're both into eroticism and talking about how that's an energy we're born with, which is similar to anxiety. I love reading. It's just very fascinating to me, because I still feel like that's a new, again, sexuality and eroticism is a new area that's ever changing and we're ever learning about. So those 2 books, at least, have been very much, I would recommend anyone for them to read.
Have you looked lately into the Esther Perel discussion group? Have you been a part of it lately? Yeah, it's on Facebook.
I don't think I'm a part of it. I'm part of her newsletter. And I listen to her podcast, the Between the Sheets, or.
Well, there's Where Should We Begin? And then she has How's Work? And
that one.
Yeah, she's got several things going on there.
Yeah,
but I'm a part of her discussion group, and I find it very interesting. Sometimes it triggers me, even if I'm going to be honest with myself, because I have to take a step back, because I'm extremely logical, and I guess I always want to get to the solution as fast as possible. But I've recognized by going to that group and reading other people's life situations that everybody's in a different space. Everybody interprets things differently. They don't have to interpret it the way you want. And by listening to some of the responses, it has taught me to see things like, oh, I really didn't think about it like that. Even though I'm frustrated at the person, it's just, at the end of the day, it's like, just get over it and move on. That's what I want to tell people half the time. But everybody is in their stage of healing, or, going through whatever it is they need to go through. And you need to be able to recognize that and let people go through that.
Well, I think that goes to, 2 things. I think that goes towards being uncomfortable, and that maybe for that person, the solution comes later or just doesn't come. Everyone's different with how whatever solution they find. And then also, I think too, is one thing one of my professors would talk about too, is how you plant seeds with people, and then maybe they'll grow.
Yeah.
Maybe they will grow. Maybe you get to see them grow in 5 years or in a week. Maybe it's not the seed they need, and it just sits there. But I think that that's part of the conversations, that you can plant seeds, but it's up to the person to do what they want to do.
Yeah, to keep it watered if they choose to water.
Yeah, if they choose to water it. And it's up to them too. who am I to say that seed is what they need? Highlights on what you're talking about too. But yeah, going towards the uncomfortable and sitting with that instead of making someone, here's your solution, just sitting
Yeah.
with it.
So I try not to give any solutions on that group.
On that.
And lots of people
called?
do. It's the Esther Perel discussion group.
Oh, I bet you that's great. I want to popcorn and just eat.
Oh no, literally, that discussion group, you could make a whole series of whatever you want out of just the content coming out of what people are putting about their lives there.
That's so funny.
It's like, oh my God, oh no, you didn't. Oh. And it's real life. So, and you know, people are literally bearing their souls there. And for the most part, people they do approach it with care. But there is, like what you said, a lot of people that are just, well, this is the solution, just do it. And then other people that are like, you know, this is suggestions I may have that you may want to try. Again, they're planting the seeds. I do enjoy being a voyeur on that discussion group, and every once in a while posting a little something. Just
do you post?
I have posted stuff, but nothing like that relationship wise, where, you know, because, you know, Esther Perel has her language of like, you know, the affair partner and the this and the, so they speak in all this dialect, but they shorten it. So it's like, oh, I just found out that the AP was seeing my ex and blah, 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 and all this. And you know, you get into these just real in-depth stories and feelings that these people are having. And yeah, I don't really watch TV. I'll just go look at something. I'll go read Esther Perel's discussion group and see what people are putting on there. That's like watching an episode of anything anyway.
Yeah, I wonder too if it's been intensified because of the pandemic.
Of course
people
it has.
Having to, like, especially relationships, like
yes.
seeing relationships challenged because there's so much togetherness. Mm-hmm. And they're having to face things and talk about things and normally wouldn't.
And those are the ones that are really intense, are the ones that they were already going through their split up. Oh, and now they have to be together all the time. And there was this one story that I'm thinking off the top of my head, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. And it was, you know, the lady has her 2 kids. The husband really didn't have anywhere to go, but he wants to go to the affair partner's house. But she lives like 2 hours away. But like once a week, he would just leave and go. And then, you know, the wife is like, well, I don't want you to come back because I don't know who you're with, what you're doing. You might bring who knows what back to me and the kids. And she was asking, you know, am I wrong to think that? And of course, people start giving their, like, oh, no, you kick him out, forget him. And other people are like, oh, it's, there's so many approaches that people give. But the stories are very, again, they're real, they're palpable, they're happening. And I think that part of that group in and of itself is just fascinating just to observe. She does not, but last week she actually was on for like an hour with the moderator of whose name is Leah Marshall. And she's a very good moderator, I must say, of the group as a whole. And she was on for an hour, and, you know, like people from the group were asking questions and she was answering. So she does every once in a while come up and give an hour or 2 of her time and just discuss with the group, but not that often.
I found her book on an NPR podcast like probably 5 years ago, and that's when I read it. I was like, whoa.
I think I discovered her on a podcast, like the Tim Ferriss podcast, the first time. And then I went deep into her TED Talks and the books, and I think her communication style is just one of the best.
The way she writes and the way she talks is just really, she draws you in.
Well, she's a really good seed planter.
Yes.
She knows how to do it masterfully and make you see things in a way where you're like, oh.
Yeah, she's able to ask, which is something you have to build as a therapist in general, but you have to build ways to say things to people that they're not reactive to it, and have to become, again, more thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
So
for sure.
That's a skill you have to practice forever.
So now we're going to transition to our next question, and it's about somebody you already brought up that you said you weren't able to speak to. So now we're going to take our imagination and see if you can speak to that person. So if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old grandfather that you never met, what would you tell him?
Oh, man.
And he's 18.
He's 18. Well, that I would tell him probably to really, really appreciate the years that to come, because at that point he's 18. He has 20 years before he gets diagnosed with
losing his memory.
Yeah, which
Which is,
my mom and her siblings were teenagers at the time. But I would probably tell him to enjoy the time he has with my grandma. I think at that point they were together, but to enjoy the time he has with my grandma and his kids, and to take pictures, and to hopefully, if I could go back in time and ask him questions, get to know him. But yeah, I wish I could do that. That would be amazing.
well, you just did it in your imagination.
Because he had it for 10 years. So it's long, from like 40 to like 50 something.
And that's so intense. Like, it's growing by leaps and bounds. And what's crazy is you're saying that your grandfather had it, but it's mostly women that are getting Alzheimer's.
There's research on that too, how sleep affects it.
Yeah. Well, everything: sleep, exercise, diet, everything. Diet. So the thing is that what are we doing to ourselves in our environment that we are destroying the memories of our mothers and sisters and aunts, and like we need to figure that out with much more intensity. And there is a lot of intensity going behind it, and we are learning about it. And that's why when I think of Alzheimer's, like, there's this thing that they say that it's like type 3 diabetes, that it's diabetes for your head instead of the rest of your body. So that brings it back to nutrition and sleep and how you live your life when you're younger and how that affects you.
I think
you get older. Now he died young of it, so he had early onset. Super.
Yeah, my grandma took care of him until she couldn't, until he was in like the fetal position.
Yeah, that's rough. Being a caretaker is, and to circle back to our conversation earlier, what is this pandemic going to do for caretakers? And especially if you are a caretaker by nature and somebody you love dies and you weren't even able to take care of it because they didn't let you be there.
I know. Well, yeah, the caretaker by nature, or the one that gives and gives. I know. I think there's going to be a lot of ambiguous law where people don't have closure, or some people died in the hospital, whether it's COVID or other related diseases, and they couldn't go in and say goodbye to them, which is an ambiguous loss. Like, you're not able to say goodbye. So I think you're going to see a lot of that in therapy and in the world around too. People losing people that they can't fully say goodbye to.
Do you think that is a new thing though? Because I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I go back 100, not even, go back 50, 60, 70 years ago, World War I, World War II, you weren't able to say goodbye to any of those people. And before that, disease was rampant until the Industrial Revolution, and we came up with some medical things that, kind of put medicine, put some diseases in check. But before that, people were dying left and right without people saying goodbye to them.
Yeah, I think that one of my classmates, Chris, he has a whole book on it where he did it. He's Greek, and he did a whole study of ambiguous loss over there.
In Greece, you said? Okay.
Yeah. And he was there. He would be there when people found the bones of people who were lost, that they never, so it was like them saying goodbye to the bones of the person that died years ago. It was extremely emotional. From like war, basically, like people that lost others in war. And he did research on
which
that.
Is the history of most of humanity. Unrest throughout of all of human history. And the people who were dying the most, if we really think about it, were the men. And this is me reaching, again, I have a feeling that it has something to do with specifically American males not growing up the way we think they should. I think it has something to do with they've lost that rite of passage of, this is what made me a man, was going out and defending whatever it is I needed to defend. And I may not have come back, but at least people thought well of me for fighting for whatever it is, be it the Spartans, be it Alexander the Great, be it whatever out throughout history. It was always the guys out there dying. And that's what gave them their purpose.
Yeah, purpose. And they died, I think there's the whole thing, you died with honor. Like you died in memory because you served your country, like served a purpose, like you said, served a purpose.
Where now we got 30-year-olds playing video games, and that doesn't give you much purpose. They're playing video games about the men that died, but it's not giving them any purpose. And I think a side effect is that it's not making the mating pool better for females.
No, there was I remember learning that in undergrad. There was a thing called failure to launch, which was the
Yeah.
whole kind of study on that, on guys or girls, but it was being found more so with men that were not going out and being
Launching.
productive.
Yeah.
They weren't launching. They were going to college or not going to college at all and just staying home or moving back home after college and staying home. So they're functioning. They were under functioning, as that's a term from
The thing
Bowen.
is, we've allowed that to evolve as a culture.
Yeah,
It's
that big kind
kind of
of.
happened. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's okay or not, but I
Well, I
think
mean,
it's a product of just the capitalism. And I'm not saying anything negative about capitalism, but when
yeah,
everybody's working, there's nobody to take care of the kids or to teach the kids or that are part of the people who made the kid. Yeah, you can send them to daycare, but they didn't make him. They're not the quote unquote village.
no, it takes a
There.
village.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it
no,
does.
it does take a village. Yeah,
This is the things that we are beginning to evolve and adapt. Going back to your what's it called, family theory, natural
yeah.
family systems, is that right
Yeah.
now there's been a big disruption ever since
Mhm.
capitalism came on and technology has come on, and those things have disrupted what has typically been the life cycle of humanity.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're gonna. Yeah, I think there has been a disruption.
And disruptions come with both yin and yang. So there's going to be good and there's going to be bad, but we're just living through the part of it we're living through.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's part of. Again, there's so many different variables that affect this. I mean, there's no judgment with any of this, but when you have like families or whole societies that go through a huge struggle, like the depression or war, whatever, it puts like fire under people
Yeah.
to work
And it kind of
hard
brings
and
them
be
together.
productive.
Yeah.
And to when you have suffering, when you have especially mass suffering, you have this urgency to like, well, life is short, so you might see this happen with the pandemic. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's
It probably will if history is any guide.
indication. I think for a good long time you didn't have that. You had a generation that was a product of another generation that was trying to provide a life that was very comfortable,
Yeah.
and there wasn't much suffering. And so you got kids that didn't make failure, that didn't know how to deal with the realness of life because they've been protected from it.
Yeah.
I think that
And it's
was
not that suffering wasn't out there. It was just being, we were putting
that's
the
it.
eyes over the
Yeah,
youth of this country. Because I'm sure if you went to
that's it.
Vietnam or Hong Kong or other places where things were
Other
happening.
cultures completely
Yeah.
different. Other
Yeah.
cultures, I think that was an American thing, and specifically probably with certain cultures within America for sure. But I think that that led to a certain kind of let's protect kids from that suffering, and it came out with the outcome of entitlement
Yeah.
and things like that.
So how do we get away from that?
Let kids fail. Mistakes, let them fall down. You don't have to save kids from they have to learn. That's part of evolution. If they don't, then that's the whole they're comfortable at home. Why would they go out and into the real world if they can just stay home?
Where it's uncomfortable to to have to grow.
Yeah, where
But it's
there's
just like a plant, right? When you're planting a plant, they tell you shake it a little bit so that it becomes more durable. So you have to put it through some
yeah, it has to go through storms and
difficulty.
difficulty in order to build resilience and growth and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So part of it, I would say, is how we need to let people fail, but how do we let them, or how do we get people to have a better relationship with failure?
For sure. Like you have to build acceptance with failure, and that's not inherently bad to fail. That without failure, you don't know what success is.
Exactly.
So you have to kind of like that. You don't know what if you don't know what sadness is, you don't know what happiness is.
Exactly. There's the yin
And
and yang of it all again.
you gotta have to too. Like life isn't. It's part. This is also part of Bowen theory. Life isn't fair. So you have to kind of stop the comparison thing, which you see a lot of. Is like someone is always going to have it worse than you. Someone's always going to have it better than you. So I think that's part of a natural process too, and part of evolution. Obviously, there's things that we can help and change in the world, which we're seeing now. Seeing a lot of progressive stuff happen, which will help. But I think there's always going to be a range of what's fair and what's not fair. I think that's so. I think kids have to learn not to compare themselves to other people. Like let that encourage you to work harder.
Yeah.
I think that's again obviously there needs to I think we've talked about this before. it'd be great if we could have equal opportunity, but I don't think
Yes.
we'll ever have equal outcome. I
Yeah.
think that there's always, people have natural skills and abilities, and they should be given the opportunity, just like everyone else, to use them. Equal
Yes.
opportunity should be a big thing, but I think there's always going to be a range of abilities.
Everybody can't be LeBron.
No.
Everybody
No.
can't be Jordan. Everybody can't be Tom Brady, to use sports analogies, but everybody
Sports
can't
analogies,
be the best at everything. You
no.
can be the best at what you're the best at, and
Yeah.
that's cool.
And I think that's kind of how you build character, how you build all this, staying humble, all that kind of stuff too, is understanding that failure is part of life and building kind of endurance for it.
All right, so here's the last question. Are there any questions you would like to ask me?
Yes, of course. Okay, well, a few questions, I guess. I have a few questions I've been thinking of. What for you, either recently or the last couple of years, has been the biggest challenge for you?
Well, my biggest challenge is trying to grow business, and when it doesn't grow the way I want, not take it personally. Because
Okay.
I'm in the wellness space. I have clients, and whenever a client stops working with me, it would be very easy to be like, oh well, they just weren't ready, they weren't serious, they were, it's easy to blame them. But when somebody stops working with me, I have a tendency to blame it on myself. It's like, I didn't use the right words, I didn't plant the seeds correctly, I didn't do enough of what I needed to do to impress on this person how important it is that they take care of themselves, and that maybe even if it's not with me, but at least I can be a part of, like I said earlier, the resources that they use for that tree to grow. So I take it a little personally when somebody stops. My intention is, I want to plant seeds that grow.
I can understand that. I think there's a difference between accountability and blame. I think self-blame is not good, and blaming other people isn't good, but looking at something and what's happening and saying some mantra that's been mine for the past year or so has been, what is this teaching me? What am I learning from this? What does this teach me? How am I accountable? Even if things, there's that book, The Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah,
That
the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
It talks about, took a few things out of that book, but it was basically like, how even if things aren't fair, how am I still accountable? How can I take charge and go from, which I think is hard. I think it's hard to do that. I think our natural instinct can be to blame ourselves, doubt ourselves, or blame other people.
Well, I try to bring it back to my intention, right? And my intention, again, is to always try to be the best conduit of help that I can towards people. Basically, you're probably doing the same thing, right? And you know what? Sometimes it is that people are lazy and they don't want to do the inner work that it's going to take. But I never want to blame it on them.
No, we don't.
Because that's not going to help the situation.
We also, no matter how much we know somebody, we never really fully know them. So we don't know what's going on in their life. If someone stops therapy with me, I have to just take it as it comes. I can't take it personally, and I can't take it, am I doing therapy wrong or whatever? How do I learn from it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The thing is, I guess maybe as my younger self, it would have been easier to take it personally. Like, oh,
yeah,
what did I do wrong? And it's like, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Now at this stage of it, it's just, again, I do say that maybe I wasn't able to phrase things correctly, or maybe I didn't get something there. What could I have done better is what I'm always trying to figure out.
But I think that's different than blaming yourself. Again, I think that goes along with, what am I learning from this?
Yeah,
how
for
can
sure.
I grow from it, instead of, I think, again, as you get older, you get better with the whole differentiation, like not taking it personally, being able to learn from it instead.
Let's keep learning.
You're growing a new business out in Colorado, right?
I'm working on it.
Yeah, that's going to be a whole new challenge for you.
It's going to be a whole new challenge, but there's this pandemic is coming with evolution and adaptation. So basically it's coming with change. So the mantra I have incorporated for this is, let's embrace the change. Let's go with it instead of fighting it and trying to figure it out. So if change was to come, I made sure that I did a big change.
Yeah, I think my mantra has been embracing uncertainty.
Yeah, that's what this has taught us. All right. So now let's let everybody know where they can find more of you.
You can find me at Natural Systems Thinker. That's on Instagram. And it's
Okay.
Devon Dunn LMHC. So licensed mental health counselor.
All right.
That's where they can find me.
All right. Awesome. So if you guys would like to hang out with Devon and have some awesome discussions, now you know where to find her. So, but that is it for today's episode of WEYT. So please like, share, and rate this episode if you feel that any of the message here resonated with you. You can find this and past episodes of WEYT on YouTube at WEYT Show, Facebook, WEYT, Instagram, WEYT Show, and remember that's WEYT for what's engaging in your thoughts. And in closing, I would like to say time and attention is the greatest gift we can give to each other. So here's to spreading more peace, love, and smiles. Later.